I think for me, it's the shift towards a space where you can understand how people are feeling without sending them surveys. I think that is quite a fundamental shift in how we think about experience management.
Employee experience is essentially the holistic perception that employees have of their interactions with an organization through their entire journey, from recruitment and onboarding through to daily work experiences and beyond. In essence, EX is the foundation upon which a thriving, innovative and competitive business can be built. We really wanted to get an expert on to talk about this fascinating subject, and what a guest we have. Sally Winston has quite literally lived and breathed this space since graduating with a psychology degree back at the turn of the millennium. And fast forward to today, Sally is now the Director of EMEA Solutions at experience management specialist Qualtrics. Sally gives us some incredible insight on how leaders from organizations of all shapes and sizes can transform employee experience. We decode the differences between millennials and Gen Zs in the workplace. We define what burnout is and how to spot its signs and what strategies to use for prevention. And we also touch upon some of the biggest employee experience blunders that companies can make and how to avoid them. Sally is a brilliant speaker, very easy to listen to. I'm sure you will agree. It is employee experience expert Sally Winston. Thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders Podcast, Sally. I've been really excited to talk to you. Employee experience is not a subject that I know an enormous amount about, but I am a director of a company and we've got 25 employees. So it's something that I definitely feel like I need to know more about. So thanks for coming on. How are things with you in sunny Dublin today?
They're good. Yeah, I'm in Dublin for an offsite and bringing all of my team together, all 60 people from across Europe, all coming together for a couple of days. So it's nice to be here with all of the team. So yeah.
Let's start with a bang then. Mm-hmm. The opening question that I always start with, what does good leadership mean to you, Sally?
I think for me, a lot of what good leadership looks like revolves around empathy and the ability to lead and drive a business forward whilst also bearing in mind that the people that you're working with are individuals and humans, and everything that you are doing should be built on that basis. And I think as someone who's spent most of my career in EX, that would be pretty fundamental to how I think about leadership. I think the best leaders that I've worked with have really got that balance between, let's make hard decisions, drive the business forward, but do so in a way that's empathetic to the people working within the organization, and it really brings them on board and on the journey with you. I think that's key for me.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think empathy is at the core of everything. How coachable is it, the empathy piece? They talk a lot about emotional intelligence and stuff like that. Do you coach leaders in it at all in terms of developing things like empathy and EQ? Or is it something that you just think you either got it or you don't,
That's a great question. I think you either naturally lean into EQ or you don't naturally lean in. I do think it's something that can be learned though. And I think there's a lot of stuff that businesses can do to help individuals, I suppose, surface the things that would, lead them down that path. Right. So I think you can, I think it's a constant thing that people have to hone and learn. Even if you are high on EQ, you still make mistakes. You still go in directions that don't, fit with the perfect. But I do think there's a lot that can be done. I've got a group of leaders working for me who are all quite different in personality. Some of them very technical, some of them way more strategic, but all really focusing on their people. And they do so through, we will get on to kind of the company that I work for, right? But we practice what we preach in terms of giving people the insights they need in order to make the right decisions for the people that work for them. So I think you can nudge people along that path, even if naturally it's not, where they would usually go.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Well, let's come back to that then. But in the meantime, can you maybe tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, about your journey from studying psychology right up to becoming a leader in the field of employee experience and everything in between?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out doing a psychology degree around the time that lots of people did because of Cracker. that ages me slightly, but lots of people went into that space because
Oh yeah,
do you
with
remember?
Robbie Coltrane.
Yeah. People wanted to do
Wow.
psychology because they wanted to be like criminal psychologists, right? And there
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
huge
That's amazing. I used to love that
I know,
program.
exactly. And I think that there was just a huge surge of people applying for psychology degrees at that moment in time, the late 90s. But when I actually started doing psychology, I think I very quickly lent into what was called workplace psychology, business psychology. It was very much like an emerging topic at the time when I was first studying, this idea that you could really understand and improve how people felt about their place of work. And there was something about that that just really resonated with me and led me down the path of thinking I wanted to work in that space. Much more so, actually, than like some of the more traditional sides of psychology. I think also I was really keen to
Sure.
just get into work and get into business, and this was the fastest way to do that. So I went to work for a research agency that was one of the first companies really delivering what at that time were employee surveys. I stayed within that company for 2 decades, and throughout that period, employee surveys became employee engagement, which became employee experience, and it became something that every company did, as opposed to just the ones that were kind of at the front end of thinking around HR strategy. And it also became much more technology driven as a practice, with organizations, big organizations wanting to do things quickly, wanting to be able to access views and then distribute results super quickly to their stakeholders. And the technology that was used within that space moved very, very quickly. The company that I worked for was much more of a consulting firm and a research agency. And I think that's quite interesting in terms of my move into the world of tech. We had a technology division, and I used to be responsible for building out the ideas and the designs of product. And then the technology team would build out the product and work in collaboration with the team that I led. And then it got to a point, I think, in the evolution of employee experience where a number of suppliers came into the space who were much more disruptive. Qualtrics, the company that I worked for, was one of them. And you could see that there was just a huge amount of innovation and investment going on, like in many industries, right? Lots of industries were disrupted by groups of companies who just saw that they could do things better. And it became really clear that in order to progress personally in my career, but also in order to be part of the next wave of what employee experience would look like, I probably needed to join one of the tech companies that were operating in that space. As I was starting to think about that, I got approached by a headhunter to go and work for Qualtrics. Qualtrics were always at the front of my thinking in terms of who would I want to work for? Who do I think is going to kind of ride the next wave? Who would be exciting as a company to work for? And then I joined Qualtrics in 2019. We were called the Solution Strategists, and they are essentially a group of subject experts, most of whom come either from consulting backgrounds or who've worked in client organizations. And we essentially help companies understand what could your experience strategy look like, and then how could our technology fit into that strategy.
What were the key milestones in your career that stand out and set you on the path that you ultimately ended up taking? What stands out for you? That was a pivotal moment in my career.
A lot of what I do now is about, this is a very high growth company, right? A high growth industry. So a lot of what I do is about introducing our solutions to new customers and very much working hand in hand with our business development team. And very early on in my career, I moved from consulting into sales, and I spent quite a long time in sales and leading sales teams. And that, I think, was a pivotal moment because it taught me that I actually really loved the energy of that type of an environment. I love working with salespeople, leading salespeople, and I loved the kind of designing out what the customer needs and then handing it over to someone else to actually deliver. And that was definitely pivotal. And what was interesting is my dad was a very senior salesperson in L'Oreal. And I think I kind of got that gene from him. So selling something very different, but I think I just got the sales gene. It's in my bones. So I spent a long time working in sales and building out a sales team. And then I moved into other roles within the company. So I was usually put in charge of things that needed to grow or things that needed to change. So I led out a consulting team. I built out a practice focused around the public sector for a while. I then, when we were acquired by an advertising agency I then spent time thinking about how you could connect our solutions to the solutions of the advertising agencies. All of those moments, I feel, took me in different directions, let me test out different skill sets. Some of them involved leading teams of people, some of them didn't, which I think was really useful and actually kind of interesting, because there were certain points in my career where I really wanted to lead people, certain points where I didn't. I wanted to step away and do something else and then come back to that. And I think that definitely with some of, when I'm talking to people in my team about their career development and their career progression, I try to iterate to them that it's really important that you don't see your career as just linear, and that you take all the opportunities that come to you, because they're how you find where your joy is and where your joy isn't. And then you move on to, and where you find your joy is different depending on your life stage, I think, and the evolution of the company that you're working in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes total sense. So in terms of CX, what are the sort of key differences that have surprised you about when you moved into CX? Do you know what I mean? Was there anything, I didn't realize quite how different it was, or whatever? What things stood out for you as being very different?
I think, and this is one of the reasons why I think it's sometimes challenging in businesses for EX and CX teams to connect and to talk to each other. I think they come from very different perspectives. From a CX point of view, often a lot of the work originates in something that's quite operational. So a lot of the work that companies do in that space is about, very productive, proactive fixes of customer experience problems, whereas EX can come from quite a strategic viewpoint that in some businesses, some stakeholders might consider it a bit fluffy. It isn't. It absolutely isn't fluffy, right? But it's often about big picture topics like learning and development and vision and, connection of individuals to a company. And it's much more about big picture change than it is about individual in the moment interaction and engagement and change. And you're seeing those two things come much closer together. But I definitely think that is a big difference. I think also the people doing that type of work in the CX space are much more traditionally research savvy. So they understand methodologies. They come from a slightly different background. They're often much more hands-on in how they want to use data and get kind of quite in the weeds with the data. Whereas EX people tend to be less naturally from that background, although we're seeing the two come together much more closely, I would say, in the last couple of years.
Yeah, sure. How have employee needs changed? Let's say in the last, I'm just trying to obviously put it in a timescale, but let's say in the last 10 years, what are the sort of most profound changes you've seen in what people need from their employers, I think is a better way to describe it?
I think it shifts over time. There's a lot of talk in the EX space about different generations of employees. So you will have heard about the phrase millennials, right? Millennials now actually are at a point when they're running businesses, and we've now got the next generation, Gen Z, of and then I think we're on the generation after that now. And often it's talked about in terms of how those generations expect different things from organizations. They typically expect their careers to not be within one company, right? So they also want more opportunities to learn and develop quickly, but their expectation is that they will then move on. We're seeing definitely a rise in the importance of purpose within businesses, and businesses having like a very clear sense of strategic purpose, issues like climate change, etc., very close to the hearts of people coming into the world of work, and others as well, right? It's not just something that young people care about. I think they would be two areas in the space in which, in terms of technology, I think what's been really interesting for companies in terms of how they think about employees is individuals expect actually quite a high level of technical capability within organizations. They expect the tools that they're using within companies to be the same as the tools that they're using in the real world. They expect to be able to, in our world, they expect to be able to share their views whenever they want to. They expect a quick reaction and a quick response. And they expect the technology that they're working with to work. And that's led to the rise of, some more disruptive technology companies helping organizations structure their businesses in a way that, it's not acceptable that your laptop wouldn't work, for example. There's some really interesting data on that topic around how employees will leave companies that don't have the technology that they need to help them do their jobs.
I think patience has changed as well. I think the younger generations just want everything at their fingertips, don't they? What is the biggest difference, do you think, between millennials and Gen Z?
I think it's interesting, right? Because I, as now an older person, I remember back to being at the start of my career, and I think I was pretty impatient. So I'm not sure that that impatience is really any different. You know, I think when you're at the start of your career, you want to know that you're progressing, but maybe that's just a personal thing. I think what the research suggests is that the next generation are more realistic than millennials were. Millennials are known as the generation that were really quite visionary. They had lots of expectations of adventure and opportunity and were very bold in their asking for that experience at work. Whereas this generation has grown up in a different time economically, which then, if you completely believe in this concept, right, because there's lots of debate over whether it exists or not, which then leads
Sure.
the new group of people to just be a bit more realistic about, you know, where do I want my career to go? What company should I pick on the basis of stability, security, but also, am I confident that this company has got what it takes to survive disruption and to grow and develop in the future? I think
Yeah.
that will manifest itself in the same types of themes. You know, people want career development.
Yeah, sure.
They want an opportunity to have a say. There's perhaps, particularly post-COVID, there's more expectation of work-life balance and that companies are more flexibility than previously. I'd say the themes are similar, but they shift depending on what's going on in the broader economic environment and climate.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I think that's a really that makes total sense. So you mentioned COVID there. Obviously, that's a bit of a ground shifting moment for employee experience. I mean,
Yeah.
everyone saw the difference. Obviously, the work from home revolution happened, and lots of other things. What were the sort of biggest profound shifts that you sort of saw from the pandemic and the ensuing 2-year period that we're sort of in now? What's changed?
Yeah, so I think the biggest shift that we saw in terms of employee experience measurement and the conversation about employee experience measurement was that companies very quickly shifted into a space where they embraced the idea of more continuous listening and faster pace, more reactive listening. And it was really interesting because we launched a product right at the beginning of COVID that was free for organizations to use. And it was called How Are You? And it was essentially just a really easy tool to just check in with how people were feeling. And it was picked up pretty much immediately by thousands of companies. And I think what it opened up is a door that was about, we can ask people simple, quick questions. We can get that quick feedback and we can do something about it. And we don't need to treat this as an area that needs to be very well thought out and, you know, very well controlled, etc. So that was really exciting. Obviously, since COVID, lots of the research that we did shows that there are fairly significant issues associated with burnout coming into the workplace, blurring of the boundaries between work and home, and, you know, obvious issues relating to just the broader context that people are living in. And then now the key theme is hybrid working and return to office, and how do you get the balance right between really embracing the positives about what happened during COVID in terms of flexibility and productivity with the benefits of being in the office as well, and everything that you know that brings.
Yeah. So burnout is something that I think personally, I can only speak for myself. When we shifted over to working from home, then all of a sudden your house becomes your office. You must have heard this story 1,000 times, but I really struggled with that and burnt myself out on multiple occasions by working for too long. It was kind of like the novelty of having a spare bedroom as an office. I just wasn't switching off. I was not switching off. I was constantly in a state of working, and it took me a while to really address that. Do you know what I mean? Come to terms with this hybrid working setup, because it changed a lot of people's lives, doesn't it? You know. So the question I have for you, Sally, is what is burnout? What signs do you look for in people to sort of identify that they are experiencing burnout?
Yeah, so I think that I'm not a scientist, right? I'm not a doctor. And there are lots of different definitions of burnout that range from, you know, quite severe in terms of mental health issues towards more, you know, just a tendency towards individuals feeling like they're not entirely in control of, you know, and that they've lost a sense of control. They might lose a sense of purpose, and that they essentially just get to a place where they're exhausted by work. And then, there's more scientific definitions of how that shows up and what the implications and dangers of that are. I think when people use the term burnout, they're often more thinking about just that feeling of kind of complete overwhelm and overwork. Yeah. And, we did some research that showed that a pretty significant proportion of people would identify themselves as being in that space where they just felt like they were completely exhausted and overwhelmed by the amount of work that they have to do and unable to kind of see the wood for the trees.
Sure. What signs do you look for then?
When we think about data, we kind of talk about there being 3 types of data that you can work with, and the bringing together of those data on any topic gives you, a sense of the reality of what's happening. So you've got operational data, you've got behavioural data, and then you've got experience data. And a lot of what we do is about like bringing those 3 things together to really give like a holistic picture. We actually acquired a company at the beginning of this year who really focused in on the behavioural data measurement space. And one of the things that they do, they track things that would show signs of burnout, like individuals working late hours or number of emails sent outside of working hours, volume of conversation, volume of workload. If I'm looking at my team in particular, I would look at things like there's a certain number of customers that any one person in my team can confidently and comfortably handle before they get to a point where they're just completely overworked and overwhelmed. And I would look at data like that, right? If somebody's got, I don't know, they're having 20 conversations in a week, that's usually too many to be able to do a good job. And that then leads to a feeling of overwhelm and burnout. But there are tools and technologies that you can use to really properly track that kind of activity. I think there's a really interesting moment coming whereby there's all of this data available that you could do really good things with, but it's about how you balance that with employee privacy and make sure that you're using that information in the right way.
That makes total sense. So in terms of your customers and companies you've dealt with in the past and heard about, what are the biggest employee experience mistakes that leadership teams and companies typically make, do you think? You don't have to land anyone in it. Don't
I think there's a few things. So I think when we look at the employee journey, right, the life cycle from when you are attracted to a company, when you interview with a company, all the way through to when you leave, there's a period at the beginning of someone's career when from the moment they join, for the first few months, it is absolutely fundamental to whether that person's going to be happy and successful within a business. And I think I can think of multiple examples where companies have not thought hard enough and have not planned enough for that onboarding experience to be successful. It's not just about like, has the person got the stuff they need? Do they have the training they need? Have they got the support system? It's also, are they being regularly checked in on with their managers way more frequently than you would think they would need to be? Do they understand the vision? Are you already starting to talk to them about what their career opportunities could be? And have you made promises during the interview stage that are just not materializing? So that not taking enough care of the onboarding experience is definitely one area.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think another one would be the role that leadership play in setting a really strong vision for a company is fundamental. We talk about this concept of engagement in our space, which is essentially is someone motivated, inspired, are they likely to stay? It goes way beyond are they satisfied? It's, are they proud? Are they motivated, etc. Leadership plays a very crucial role in achieving that engagement. And that's about more regular communication, setting a clear vision, and two-way dialogue with employees and feeling like you can have that, you can share your ideas and those ideas will be listened to. They would be, kind of two really obvious ones, I would say.
Can I ask you a question about number 2 before you come to number 3? How typically does this work in terms of the dialogue with employees so that you can have that incremental improvement in the relationship between employer and employee? Do you do that? Do you do that sort of anonymously, or do you typically, is it just a case of having one-to-ones and face-to-face conversations to get that feedback, so you get that honest feedback loop,
Yeah, I think it depends on the company, and I think it depends on the leadership within that organization. It definitely depends how big the company is, right? If you're a small company, it should, in theory, be very easy to have that dialogue. And that's, one of the things that shifts like from a start in the tech space, from startup to, scale up and then beyond. that engagement and interaction and closeness of leadership really changes. So that's something that, companies going on that journey need to really think about. It's almost always the case that companies now have some sort of system of anonymous feedback and of checking in with people anonymously. And, that kind of mechanism is, I would say, almost always standard practice now. But I think you have to combine it, right, with opportunities to talk face to face and to build a relationship and to really kind of, create that kind of culture of two-way feedback. But yeah, it depends on the company.
Yeah, of course not. Makes total sense. So sorry to derail you. You were just about to give me your third biggest mistake employees make around EX.
The third mistake, I think, is to think of employees as like just a homogenous group who all think the same, care about the same, want the same. I think we're not all the same. People have got different motivations, different things that they care about. There's a ton of stuff that you can do to really understand that. And I think you can set up all of these systems to create a great workplace, but if they're not tailored or are able to be edited to what the individual needs, you're never going to really create a great experience for everyone because everybody needs different things.
What's your thoughts on these systems? You mentioned systems there. I think one that had quite a profound effect on me it's called strength deployment inventory, where you do a couple of questions and then you do another series of questions, and basically it tells you whether you fall into three categories and then where you fall into the three categories. What's your thoughts on these type of tools and psychometric systems to manage people and have context around conversations around employee experience?
Personally, I really value systems like that. We use one which might be, I can't remember what it's called, but it might be similar to the one you're talking about where we think of colours, but there are 4 colours. So it's red, yellow, green, blue. I think as tools that help teams understand themselves and help individuals understand themselves, I think they're really helpful. There's multiple different versions, right? And I think if you design your entire business or your entire team strategy around a tool like that, you're probably not going to be that successful. But I think as an input, I think they're really, really helpful. Maybe it's the same thing, but I'm a very strong yellow-red. And I know that I lean more into red in times of stress, and knowing that is really helpful. And then also if I've got people in my team who are much more blue or much more green, and it helps me to understand how to interact and engage with them when we're not quite gelling or when we're not quite communicating effectively.
It's good to have that context, isn't it? And I think what it does give you, especially as a leader, it gives you a framework in which to deal with situations with employees who fall into certain categories. You know what I mean? And that it's amazingly accurate in terms of what motivates people as well. You know what I mean? So if someone's more process orientated, they're just more motivated by structure.
Yes.
It's as simple as that. So, and it does work. It's just you get the odd outlier who's impossible to categorize because their answers are all over the place. But yeah, you can't have it all.
But they're usually the good ones. They're ones that you can really crack. They're what motivates them. They're amazing.
You talked a bit about scale, Sally. Okay, and I'm a big believer in this. I think company culture and scale. I spent a lot of time working in recruitment, and I always, it was kind of like you meet the criteria of what your client is looking for to fill the role. But if they'd come from a company or they'd worked for companies who had a totally different scale to what the client is, okay. So, for example, if it's an enormous global conglomerate and you find a really suitable employee technically, but they've worked in startups, it's difficult to shift into that corporate world. So in terms of scale, is it a totally different challenge for, say, the leadership or a managing director of a small company? What are the biggest changes? What advice do you give to small companies to improve their employee experience?
I think for small companies, often it's easier because I think you can embed culture consistently in a much more robust way. I think, imagine you're an organization where you've got, one founder and then you've got 5 leaders, right? If you're all on the same page and you set out clearly what your vision and your goals are, and I think at that point you also need to define your culture and your values. I don't think you can get away without defining it, because once you've defined it, you've then got 5 people who need to line up, and they might have their own unique way of positioning that culture, but fundamentally it's easier to stay together than when you start to scale and you bring in, new talent and new leaders, and you have to keep them on board with the culture. Qualtrics actually has done, I think, quite a good job of this, in that we the founders of Qualtrics set out a very strong set of values called the TACOs. And those values are still embedded in the way that we operate today. And they've shifted, right, as we change and as the environment that we're working in, we become much bigger, but they change.
Sorry, did you say
Tacos.
tacos?
Yeah, like, Taco Tuesday.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Do you want me to explain the tacos?
Yeah, no, that would be good. I think just for context, it would be good to understand. Yeah.
Yeah, so Qualtrics has this thing called the TACOs, and TACOs basically stands for transparency, all in, customer obsessed, one team, and scrappy. And right, that is essentially
interesting combo.
And that was the kind of values that defined the company when it was first set up. There's like a long story of history to how Qualtrics was set up that's quite interesting. And tacos were there right from the beginning, right? And so whenever we hire people, we look at hiring them on the basis of, are they a good fit with the tacos? Yeah. We talk about tacos every day. We don't eat tacos every day. That would be a bit weird.
It would be a bad thing.
And we do have to think about how does some of those concepts, like how does the concept of scrappy change from when you're a startup in the basement of, like literally the company started in a basement of a house. Yeah. What scrappy means there versus what scrappy means when you're worth billions of dollars is very different, but that has to be defined and clearly laid out for people. But the concept of having values that you live by, I think, is important for every type of company. I think back to your earlier question about how do small companies need to operate versus big companies, I think it's easier for smaller companies to articulate that. I think the challenge is always then how do you create the structure and environment to get bigger, and how do you think about the future in terms of the talent that you're hiring, and the work that you're doing, as well as living in the moment and being a good employer in the day-to-day right now. Because for lots of employees, like career progression is really important to them. If you're a small company that has aspirations, that's really exciting for people to be on that journey. But I think you have to paint for them what that journey looks like in order to keep them and to make them feel like they're part of the future of the organization.
Yeah, part of the bigger picture. Yeah. I think unifying everyone with a united cause is very challenging, isn't it? When you've got people in all different stages of their career. So I think gluing that together and creating, I always like to do maritime examples, if everyone's rowing in the same direction, you know what I mean? You're less likely to hit the iceberg, but it is tough because you're always going to get a couple of rogues who are rowing in a different direction, and you've got to bring them all together. It's an art form for sure. The big elephant in the room in relation to EX and all areas of any business right now is AI and the development of AI. We've all been blown away by ChatGPT and large language models over the last couple of months, and I'm sure it's only a matter of time before this technology starts to impact the culture of businesses in many, many ways. How do you see the picture around AI, and how is it going to disrupt EX, in your opinion?
Yeah, so we're doing some, what I think is super cool stuff with AI. One of the things that is kind of unique to how we're thinking about it is we have this database of billions and billions of data touch points, right? So that's all been collected for the purpose of understanding experience. And so what we're doing is thinking about, okay, well, how do you use that information with purpose, and how do you apply the tools like ChatGPT with a goal in mind? So not sporadically, not thinking about what the purpose of it is, but actually saying, okay, well, how can we make businesses more human, more empathetic through the use of technology? And so some of the ways in which we would do that, for example, there's a huge trend in the space of EX at the moment towards thinking about continuous ongoing measurement of how people are feeling. If you do that through surveys, you're going to quickly bore people with constant questions. You just cannot, keep questioning people without them wondering, when you're going to leave them alone to get on with their jobs.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've been doing is looking at pulling information from conversations that are just happening already. So people are talking about their work in multiple places. How can you utilize that data, bring it all together, and surface the issues that people are talking about? So that could be through tools like Yammer or Slack channels, etc.
Yeah.
One of the principles that's like super important in the world of EX, and we've got a whole team of people focusing in on this topic is privacy, and not doing anything that would identify individuals, pulling information together in such a way that surfaces those issues and helps you predict what might be coming. So we talked earlier on
interesting. Okay.
in the podcast about signs that there might be some sort of stress related challenge appearing,
Sure.
right? Or people might start to talk on a certain topic. Well, you don't need to wait to ask the question. We can tell you that there's a theme bubbling in the things that people are talking about. So I think that's really exciting. The other area that I think is going to really disrupt through the use of AI is how people surface insights. So imagine a world in which you can throw like tons and tons of data into a system, right? Every piece of research that you've ever done, and then we will pull for you. These are the key findings. Like, I don't know, salespeople working in this region are particularly productive if they're given great career development, communication on this topic, this type of training. The ability to pull that insight together quickly is going to make people's lives so much easier.
100%. Yeah.
And I think those are the sorts of positive outcomes that I think we can see as a result of using AI. It's the ability to pull data from lots of sources and the ability to interpret it and nudge people to action very quickly. So imagine then also that you could give a manager a piece of data and then say to that manager, I don't know, the data is suggesting that your team is about to experience burnout. Here are a few things that you could do to help stop that happening, like productive, positive changes that you could make for your group of employees in order to see that change. And I think those are all really positive ways to think about the use of AI in the EX space that we're kind of quite excited about.
That's really exciting. I think the capability to upskill people by reading long documents and then giving them the best bits of what they really need to know, that's gonna be so profound. I mean, that's gonna change everything, isn't it? Think how much that's gonna change education. Do you know what I mean? It's gonna change so many things, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think if you're a manager, right, imagine often managers managing the people that work for them is only one part of the job that they're doing. The data should suggest that often they're not trained or necessarily like natural people leaders to the extent that they should be. So anything you can do to make it easier for them to create a great environment for their people alongside all their other bits of day job has got to be positive, I think. And I think it can be really exciting. I think sometimes we're a bit afraid of what the future holds. But I think if we turn it to, what could this do that's proactive and productive and could add real value, I think it's exciting.
What are Qualtrics doing at the moment then? Are you guys investing in AI innovation? Are you just talking about it at the moment? What are you doing to sort of prepare for this inevitable change in the workforce and within businesses over the next 5 years?
Yeah, so we're investing really heavily in this topic. We've got teams of developers already working on product. Some of it's already been launched into market and we're experimenting with lots and lots of different things. It depends on the area of focus. So the teams that work with our what we call market research buyers, right? So that's people doing research to look at, well, what's the next big thing? What do we need to do to better engage high net worth individuals? So much more like strategic research. It's about pulling all of those insights together and surfacing the right ones. For the EX team, a lot of what we're doing is about making it easier for managers to take action on the basis of the topics that are important to them and really bringing to life, bringing in behavioral data and operational data and experience data into one place. And then for customer experience, it's much more about like surfacing insights and driving action. So like imagine, you're on a flight and something goes wrong with the experience on that flight and you get the opportunity to share your views and give your feedback, or you make a complaint, and then it's about how do we quickly handle that complaint in a way that saves the relationship with that customer and potentially improves the relationship with that customer. You can use AI in lots of ways to help proactively drive better customer experiences. So there's tons of really cool stuff that we're doing. And actually, like, lots of our customers are really open to experimenting, which has just been really exciting. We've got to go down lots and lots of different paths with them already.
Oh wow! So they're backing your research essentially, then, are they? So that you can experiment with their own data.
For most of our customers, they are collecting tons and tons of data, so their data is available to use for the purpose of their insights.
Sure.
So there's lots of cool stuff happening with some of the customers that we're working with for sure.
Fantastic. So I'm keen to understand what you're most excited about at the moment, Sally, in terms of, we talk about AI in the EX world and in business generally, but so maybe there's an element of AI that you're particularly excited about. But the question is a bit more broad than that. What tech innovation are you most excited about in the world right now?
I think for me, because I'm so deep in the experience space, right? I
Yeah.
get excited about that. And I think for me, it's the shift towards a space where you can understand how people are feeling without sending them surveys. I think that is quite a fundamental shift in how we think about experience management. And I don't think that means, we won't do surveys, we won't proactively ask people questions about their experience. But I do think that there is a huge shift coming in terms of how you can access how people feel and use it to help drive better experiences. That's what I'm most excited about, I think.
So is that by monitoring their behavior online, what they're Googling, what time they're knocking off at the nights, etc., stuff like that, and putting those data points together
Yes.
to, create trigger points for this person's disengaged, this person's super engaged, whatever. Is that the kind of thing you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, are people talking about certain topics in chat spaces, and how do we leverage that information? I think the other thing is, like, one of the trends that we're seeing in HR is this idea of HR as a strategic decision maker in the board, and the use of people data to drive business outcomes. And we're doing a lot of work around the connection between employees and customers, or employees and productivity, and using like outcome data, connecting it with the experience data. That's been something that HR people have talked about for years and years and years, but the technology's only recently really become available to do it quickly and easily. So that, I think, will probably be really the next exciting thing, because that's about putting HR at the center of business change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's going to be quite transformative, I think, isn't it? When once that data gets utilized in the right way. No, that's really exciting. So looking back on your career, Sally, when you left university in your early 20s, what career advice, or what advice generally would you give to that person, knowing what you know now?
I think it would, and I think this is advice that I try and give to the people in my team who are at the start of their career, but whilst also hearing myself, knowing what it's like to be a young person, right? And remembering that. I think it would be to be patient, and to take every opportunity that comes along as like a new learning experience. So you don't need to think about where am I going to get to until really quite late in your journey. But if you think about it in terms of every opportunity that comes to me, let me grab it. I think I did that, but I think I probably worried too much about where I might be going, as opposed to just seeing what happened.
Yeah, sure. Stressing about a future that may not happen, sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think the other thing I think that's really interesting and I like try to really think about this quite deeply sometimes, is I remember being like quite frustrated about some of the decisions that leaders might have made when I was, had lots of opinions and lots of ideas. And I remember thinking, like, why is no one listening to my ideas? And I think with experience, you gain like so much more perspective, and you've learned lessons, right, that you don't have when you're at the start of your career. But I also, one thing that I try really hard to do is, when people who are at the start of their career in my team or in other teams bring me ideas, I listen harder to their ideas, because they're coming at it with a fresh perspective. They don't have all of that baggage and all of that learned history. So actually, sometimes they come up with things that you're just like, oh my goodness. And I sometimes think I didn't always feel like people were listening to me. And so I really try to listen to them and, get them involved when they've got a great idea, get them involved in making that come to reality.
No, that's really good advice. And it strikes a chord with me as well. I think there's a lot there that makes total sense. No, thank you for sharing that. What kind of book, or maybe you can say another piece of content if you want, like a documentary or a movie or something, but what have you been inspired by? What piece of content have you been inspired by recently?
So it's interesting, because I was actually talking to another team within the company earlier today about work-life balance and about what I've learned on that topic. And I massively geek out on this topic. It's my favorite thing to learn about. And I would say the podcast and like books from Cal Newport are one of the things that has continues like weekly to most inspire me.
Yeah.
I think his view of what productivity looks like is very interesting. I think his, like, both from a personal point of view in terms of how you structure and manage your days and your life and whatever, but also in terms of how he thinks about how companies should change their view of what productivity looks like and make it less fast and a bit more deliberate and slow and balanced and mindful. So I would definitely say, Cal Newport, anything from Cal Newport is really inspiring to me.
I've read one Cal Newport book, and it had a real profound effect on me. And I've actually spoken about the book Deep Work on this podcast loads of times, because Deep Work really, I'd read it on a holiday to the Caribbean, and I'll never forget it. It took me on this path, and my wife as well, to sort of having these, and I'll put this in inverted commas, we call it a digital detox, whereby we just, the main thing that came from it is if you ever want to reach a level of thought where you can achieve creativity, or you can produce a piece of content which is good, okay, or is the best you can possibly produce, you have to remove interruptions like email,
distraction.
Because the distraction puts you in a shallow frame of a shallow frame of thought, if that makes sense. You don't get into deep thought, and that's what the book's all about, isn't it? It's deep work, getting into a deep thought. And everyone knows when you hit that flow, like when you're writing an essay in university or something, to get into that flow state, there's a reason why writers go and live in a hut in the middle of nowhere to write a book, isn't it? Because that's where you have to get in the zone. And I think it just reminded me of that. But I've not read any of his other stuff, so I will. This is the inspiration I needed to maybe pick up one of the other ones.
I think another one that people talk about a lot is So Good They Can't Ignore You, which I think was written primarily for university students. A lot of his work is related to like academia and stuff. But I think a lot of the principles in that around just productivity are really interesting. But I think if you think about what it's like to work in most companies, particularly he calls it knowledge work, right, where you're in an office and you've got constant Slack messages pinging and emails coming in and people ringing you, and it's impossible to get into that state of flow. And I think that's something that just gets worse and worse and worse, and that companies need to think about, okay, hang on a second, how do we create that space for people? So
Sally, it's been an absolute pleasure. I could speak to you for far longer. We've got some amazing snippets of wisdom there, so thank you so much for sharing your expertise with the listeners, and thank you for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast.
No, my absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Wow, I really enjoyed that one. Sally was fantastic. We really delved deep into the world of EX there. So many learnings, so many takeaways. It's difficult to select one. I think what was quite profound for me was spotting burnout. I think that was a really important one, and what are the danger signs and what to do about it. I think Sally's take on that was quite profound. And also uncovering some of the most common and critical mistakes that employers make regarding EX. I think just things like, the importance and significance of gathering the right data, and the vital need for cultivating better dialogue with your employees, I think, is something that many organizations just struggle to get right. And also just talking about how AI is going to improve that as well for many organizations. So I think there's a lot to be excited about there. But I think gathering the right data, using the information from that data in the right way to improve the dialogue between employer and employee, I thought that was fascinating. And also, we explored the overlooked aspects of the onboarding process, and just Sally highlighted the importance of a well-structured onboarding process and how it significantly influences an employee's initial experience and therefore often their entire experience. So I think I thought that was really insightful too. I mean, there was so many other things I could talk about, but it was a fantastic interview. I enjoyed it so much. I hope you did too.
Don't forget to download the Tech Leaders podcast.
If you found this episode valuable and thought-provoking, we would really appreciate it if you could quite simply click the subscribe button and possibly even leave a review. This helps us to spread the word and reach a wider audience so that we can make a bigger impact and bring you the best guests possible. Thank you so much for downloading.